Speaker for today is Professor Damien Debecker. Professor Debecker is a bioscience engineer from the University of Louvain in Belgium. He did his PhD in 2010. As an associate researcher, FNRS, he did 2 postdoctoral stays from Sorbonne University and the University of Manchester. In 2012, he obtained a PI position at UC Louvain, where he started to teach and started his own research group. The primary focus of his lab is to develop innovative catalytic materials for sustainable chemistry applications. Professor Debecker has published more than 170 papers and has a H factor of 54. In addition to being active in science dissemination as an author, reviewer, and associate editor of the ACS journal Chem Bio Engineering, Professor Debecker regularly engages in science communication on social media. So thank you so much, Professor Debecker, for joining us here today. The stage is all yours now.
Thank you very much to you for hosting me. I will share my screen and you will confirm that everything is fine. Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Everything is fine? Everything is
yes.
Perfect? Okay,
perfect.
We can start.
Yeah.
So good morning, good afternoon, good night. I don't know exactly what I have to say because we have a very diverse audience from around the globe, as I heard. So it's really my pleasure to be here for this ACS Science Talks session. You have seen a kind of complex title that I have shared with you previously. I have also prepared a shorter title, which is simply catalyst preparation in the air. And I will try to explain to you what I mean by that. But before jumping into the presentation itself, I wanted to share with you the fact that we have launched, ACS has launched 2 years ago, a journal that is called Chem Bio Engineering, of which I am very proud to be an associate editor. And this journal is quite ambitious in terms of scope, as you can see there. It covers many different fields like catalysis that we are going to discuss today, but also separation technologies, I don't know, energy storage, anything related to sustainability, sustainable processes, the optimization of synthetic processes, also health and computational chemistry as well. The journal is managed by a team that is based in Zhejiang University in China, in Hangzhou, under the leadership of Professor Ren. This is the team currently, and we are, of course, happy and eager to receive your excellent communications, paper, drafts, manuscripts in the field of engineering for bio and chemistry applications. So this being said, a quick word about myself, where I come from. You know, Europe, this tiny little purple country here is Belgium. On the next map, it's going to be another color. It's yellow. It's a small country, only 11 million inhabitants. And you know Brussels, and my university is located somewhere here under the G of Belgium. It's a university that was founded 600 years ago, In my lab, these are some pictures of my lab. What are those people doing there? Well, they're targeting various types of applications. As you can see there, you have some fields in which we are active. But what I want to insist on with this slide is that our focus in my lab is really on the catalyst itself. So we're not really working at discovering new reactions, for example. We take reactions that are known to be useful and needed for our society, like, for example, the total oxidation of some pollutants or CO2 hydrogenation, etc., etc. And we focus on trying to develop original, innovative, or high performance catalysts, sometimes also model catalysts, just to understand how the catalyst works and to guide further efforts towards high performance afterwards. So just to cite a few more, a lot of activity on the synthesis of chiral alcohols. For those ones, we use enzymes. Chiral amines also we use enzymes, but then also other things that just rely on heterogeneous catalysts, so inorganic catalysts. It can be the translocation of triglyceride to get biodiesel, valorization of bio-based carboxylic acids, or of glycerol, for example, or bioalcohols like those ones. But the focus is always on the catalyst. And if you focus on the catalyst, if you're a bit familiar with the field of heterogeneous catalysis, you know that in most cases, we are going to prepare the catalyst as in a way to support, to disperse an active metal, a metal that is known to be active for the reaction that we are targeting. We don't use that metal or that metal oxide alone. As such, we will usually support it, disperse it onto another material that is called the support. So you would take a support that has the right texture, structure, composition. You would mix it in the presence of a solvent with a precursor of the metal that you need for your reaction, be it platinum, ruthenium, molybdenum oxide, or these kind of things. And after impregnation, what we call impregnation, there are steps of drying and calcination, and you end up with your catalyst. So that's a very general scheme, and in some cases, it works very well. That's an example where we managed to disperse tiny ruthenium particles of about 1 nanometer in size on the surface of a titania support, TiO2. But that's another example from my own PhD a long time ago, where we were trying to disperse molybdenum oxide on the surface of a silica alumina support. And you can see there that it was not really a success because we had patches of molybdenum trioxide crystals that we did not want in our reaction, in our catalyst, but they were there. So what I want to show you here is that with this kind of approach, sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. It's a challenge. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that there are some limitations in some cases. And those limitations arise from a lack of affinity between the active phase and the support. So you have to play with this affinity if you want to disperse correctly your active metal, and it's not always easy to do that. So we're looking for alternative strategies. And this is where I think that preparation, alternative ways to prepare the catalyst can come handy in some cases. I'm not saying this will replace the whole thing, but in some cases it can be quite interesting. So I will try to show you some examples about that. First, I'm going to talk about aerosol all the time now for the next half an hour, I guess. So what is an aerosol? It's a dispersion of tiny droplets starting from a liquid solution or a liquid suspension. You will disperse it into a mist of tiny droplets, and there is a processing time, which is just drying. And in the end, you get a powder. These kind of processes are ubiquitous. You find them everywhere in the food industry, for example, to dry the milk powder that we give to our babies, but also to dry polymers, to dry drugs, etc., etc. And it can also be used to prepare nanomaterials. Here I'm standing with a postdoc of my team in front of a huge spray dryer that is producing tons of nanostructured alumina every day by spray drying. In the lab, of course, we don't use this kind of equipment. We use something that is much smaller. It's just an atomizer that works with compressed air, some tubings with a quartz tube here, a furnace, and filters. And what is happening is that we start with a liquid solution. We disperse it in the form of an aerosol. We pass it through a furnace, and we collect dry powders on those filters. So that's something you can build in your lab quite easily. It's not very expensive, and it's all the things that I'm going to show you afterwards. You can do that in this kind of equipment. Of course, if you want, you can also buy this kind of mini spray dryer that mimic what I showed you just before in the industry. And the result will be similar. It's just that you dry here under the effect of a cyclone. What is nice with those aerosol processes is that you have many parameters you can play on to finally get to your materials. I like this review, even if it starts to be a bit old. You can see here the diversity of materials you can get in terms of shape, but also, that's not visible here, but also in terms of composition. But you can imagine, for example, core-shaped particles, porous particles, hollow particles, donut-shaped particles, etc., etc. So you can really shape your material and tailor the microstructure as well. So looking at this diversity, it's not really surprising that these kind of processes have been exploited to prepare heterogeneous catalysts, because there also you need to have a good control on the shape, on the surface, on the porosity, etc., etc. So there's a review that we have written some years ago that captures the diversity of approaches that we can have. For today, I want to share with you three parts. The first one will be about the aerosol-assisted sol gel process. Second one will be about hosting enzymes in catalytic materials, and the last one, very short, about spark ablation. So the first one is the aerosol-assisted sol gel process, so in short, AASG. For this, I first need to take a step back. Maybe you're familiar with sol gel chemistry. In sol gel chemistry, what we're going to do is to start with molecular precursors, typically alkoxides, that you would put in water and activate by hydrolysis. You have then reactive precursors that will start to polycondense react through polycondensation reaction to reticulate to form a gel. And this gel is going to be aged and dried and then calcined to get a porous material or a material. There are two main challenges. The first one is that in catalysis, you need pores. You need to have porosity. So you need to control the texture. And this is classically done by adding surfactant or pore generating agents that, for example, here in this case for micelles, that you can burn away to leave a calibrated pore. There's another challenge that I call dispersion. By this, I mean that very often in catalysis, you will want to have one active element dispersed into another matrix. Let's say, for example, you want to have isolated titanium atoms in a silica matrix. One big challenge in sol gel chemistry is that those precursors will not react at the same pace. And so what you end up is very often inhomogeneous solids with, for example, if those react too fast, you might have, for example, an island of titania in an ocean of silica instead of having isolated titanium sites in your silica. So that's a challenge, and it's related to the fact that you work in water under slow reaction conditions, but some of them react way too fast. So doing this in the aerosol allows you to solve these problems even better, because all these steps that I have highlighted here, we will do them in a fraction, in a matter of seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds. So we start with the same kind of solution, just a little bit more dilute so that nothing happens here in the solution. We spray that in the form of droplets. We have a perfect control on the composition of the droplet because each droplet comes from a solution that is homogeneous. So good control on the composition. And during drying, you will have the formation of micelles, the polycondensation reactions that happen very, very quickly. And in the end, you collect your powder. You just have to calcine them. You can control the texture by choosing carefully your surfactant. And what is really nice is that you can control the dispersion because you have a kind of kinetic quenching. Even if the reactors react at a different pace, they don't really have the time to find each other and to form inclusions. You will quench, you will freeze the system in a homogeneous dispersion here in a mixed oxide. So the first proof of principle of those aerosol-assisted self-assembly of structured materials was shown on silica 25 years ago, as you can see there. Of course, these are not catalysts, it's just silica, well-organized structured silica. We have exploited this a bit later to make very effective catalysts. In this case, it was molybdenum-based catalysts that were outperforming state-of-the-art catalysts made by impregnation because we had a very high dispersion of the molybdenum. And I will talk a lot about silica today, but just for your information, you can work with other oxides as well. For example, here, purely titania materials, on which you can play in terms of texture, crystallinity, and therefore activity. And this was used for photocatalytic applications. We have also used, for example, these kind of supports of materials as support for ruthenium and exploit them in CO2 methylation reaction, for example. You can also find in the literature examples with alumina, ceria, zirconia, etc. I like this example here because these authors, they have prepared an alumina and then they have blended from the solution, from the starting solution, they have blended the precursors for alumina with a precursor of zirconia or gold. And in this illustration, I think it's really nice because it illustrates two scenarios. The first one, I call it the miscibility scenario. It means that when you will calcine this, zirconium will remain dispersed into its surrounding matrix because it is kind of soluble, miscible. So you see here zirconium that is dispersed everywhere in the matrix. On the contrary, gold does not really like to stay in the alumina, and when you will calcine it, it will tend to dissolve, X-solve, we call it X solution, go out of the alumina matrix, migrate to the surface and form gold nanoparticles, which can also be interesting in catalysis. So these are two scenarios that I want to discuss today. And I have illustrated it again here in this schematic. You spray your materials, you get your particles with dispersed metal species because of the kinetic quenching. And then either you have miscibility, so you will form a mixed oxide with pores, right? Or you have the mobility scenario where the metal, the precursor that is here, will just migrate towards the surface and form metal nanoparticles. So this X solution is quite nice because it allows you to bring the material towards the surface and to form nanoparticles you need in catalysis. Sometimes you need bigger particles, you just heat up a little bit more and you will trigger heavier sintrate. So if I may, if you allow me a culinary metaphor, I will say that we have two scenarios. The miscibility, if we imagine that chocolate is our active phase, would be like a brownie, if you want. Mobility scenario, it would be like a cookie. And I will illustrate this with two applications. And then I will finish by saying that in some cases, we may need both because the catalyst or the reaction we target needs two types of active sites. I hope you don't mind using this culinary metaphor here. So I'll go for the first one, the brownie, where we need the active species to be dispersed in my silicate, as dispersed as possible. I will show you this in the context of the valorization of glycerol. You know that glycerol is a waste from the biodiesel industry, and we have to make something useful with it. And what we're targeting is alkyl lactates, because they're green solvents that are very interesting. So how to make methyl lactate or alkyl lactates, for example, methyl lactate in this case, you first have to oxidize selectively this OH here to get dihydroxyacetone, and then rearrangement with methanol to get to the methyl lactate. If we focus on the second reaction, we know from the literature that we need tin-based catalysts and that it works better if we have really dispersed tin into the silica. Ideally, we should have high specific surface area, large pores, and small particles. So we thought our aerosol process was primed to solve this kind of challenge. And indeed, this is the same schematic as I showed you just before. We start with a solution that contains a silica precursor, a surfactant, and a tin precursor. The tin precursor is trapped in the silica matrix, and when we calcine, we hope to have this kind of particles. So how do they look like? Well, they look like this. We have spherical particles, of course, because they come from spherical liquid droplets. They're quite small, centered here on 200 nanometers, so that's nice. And you can already see the calibrated porosity here in these TEM images, which is perfectly confirmed by nitrogen fused sorption. You see here the mesopores centered clearly on something like about 6 nanometers. So okay for catalysis. What I told you also is that we need the tin to be highly dispersed in the material. And this can be checked by various characterization techniques, like for example here in UV visible spectroscopy, we see mostly the signal for isolated or dispersed tin for inserted into the silica matrix. And in NMR, we also see a signal for tin that allows us to exclude the presence of tin dioxide inclusions. The fact that we have a very good dispersion of this tin makes that we have a large acidity. This is the acidity that is measured by ammonia chemisorption. And if we compare our aerosol-made catalyst with a catalyst made by standard sol gel, we see that we have much higher acidity. It's basically Lewis acidity that is needed in this reaction. So I will not show you many catalytic results on that catalyst, just to show you that with this one, we managed to have a full conversion and almost full selectivity. So basically, you can remember that that side of the reaction can be completed almost quantitatively, and we have the right catalyst for that. And thanks to this high dispersion of the tin. And I would like to tell you that this is actually not really surprising. We have been working on other systems based on gallium, molybdenum, titanium, hafnium for different types of applications, as you can see here. And in all those cases that I show you here, our aerosol-made catalyst showed very high performance. But then I switch to the other scenario. We don't need dispersed metallosilicates, but we need nanoparticles because these are the active phase. This is the case, for example, for the first part of the reaction, where gold-based catalysts are known to be excellent. And we know that gold on silica is not too bad, but there is a challenge in terms of designing the catalyst because we need to have a certain size of gold nanoparticles. They should be quite small if we want to have good selectivity. And on silica, it's not easy to do. For example, you could take a silica that is made by aerosol. Why not? Taking a pure silica and then do what everybody does for gold, a method that is called deposition precipitation with urea. And if you do that, this is the kind of materials that you get. So you see the spheres, you see the mesoporosity because it was done by aerosol, very nice. But then when you put the gold on top of that, you see those dark or red or bright spots in the electron microscopy images. These corresponds to quite large gold particles that accumulate on the surface of those spheres. If we analyze those by XPS, you see a concentration of gold that is relatively high. We can determine the size of the crystallites as being also quite large, 10 nanometers in that case, which is too big for the catalysis. And the dispersion, which we approach by a kind of titration technique with a Mercapto molecule, is low. So, of course, this catalyst will not be very good for those reactions. So we thought, okay, let's try our magic with putting the gold directly in the synthesis and hope that we form small particles dispersed in our silica. When we tried that, this is what we ended up with. Again, those quite big black, red, or bright spots indicative of large gold particles. And indeed, large particles were detected if we check the XRD signal. When we analyze them by XPS, we have a very low surface concentration because most of those particles, or some of those, are actually inside of the spheres and not on the surface. And if we measure the dispersion, so the accessibility of this gold is very, very low. I would like to point out that here in XRD, we see the signal of gold, and we see it whatever the calcination temperature, but we also see it even in the fresh catalyst, so before calcination. So we'll go back to the previous slide and show you the fresh catalyst is this one, the one before calcination. So in essence, what is happening is that the gold precursor is decomposed during the treatment in high temperature here. It's not very high temperature, it's 350 degrees C and for a short time, but it's sufficient to trigger the decomposition of the gold precursor and the formation of those big particles because we already see them here. So that's the problem, and we have two big particles. So we had the idea, actually, Margot, the PhD student, had a great idea to replace a very tiny proportion of the silica precursor with another one that is called mercaptopropyl 3-methoxysilane with a mercapto group here. And mercapto groups or thiols are known to interact a lot strongly with gold. And so we hoped that it would stabilize the gold and have something more dispersed at this stage that we can then calcine to form the nanoparticles with the right size. And this is exactly what happened in the end. Our catalyst looked like that. This is it's a zoom. So this is, you can see tiny gold particles of about 3 nanometers throughout our material. I go back to my previous type of illustration. You don't see those big particles now anymore. You see tiny particles. you keep the porosity, and you see here that the fresh catalyst is totally amorphous, and it's only when you calcine at 550 or 750 that you start to see the gold nanoparticles. This is also another way to illustrate it. The effect of the Mercator group is that you decrease the size of the calcined nanoparticles. In terms of gold surface, on the surface of the spheres, it's relatively low because most of this gold is inside of the spheres, but they are accessible, as you can see here, with a quite large dispersion value. And the crystallites are very small, consistent with what we see in the images. So logically, when we tested them in this reaction, we saw for the first catalyst I show you, moderate conversion, moderate selectivity, and very low yield. For this one, where we try to put the gold directly, very poor conversion. Selectivity here does not really mean anything because conversion is so low, but you see here performance are very low. And for the one where we use this additive, that was more decent with these kind of values. So I will call this catalyst simply gold on silica, but you know that there is this Mercator. You see here that we still have a challenge. Selectivity is only about 30%. And why is that? Because the gold is so good at oxidizing this one that it's also good at oxidizing the product. So that's a big problem that is known for this kind of catalysis. It's not us, it's everywhere, selectivity and over-oxidation products. Again, in terms of performance, I wanted to tell you that dispersing small metal nanoparticles into other types of materials for other applications. We have also tried recently based on copper, mostly for different applications. So again, this is just an example that I show you, and there are other examples in the literature if you want. So now you have understood. We have the first reaction, the second reaction. What if we try to get a bifunctional catalyst that will be able to do both? So exploiting the two scenarios at the same time, mobility and miscibility. Indeed, you need those two reactions. If you do it separately in two different reactors, you will have a yield that is limited. And even if you do it in one reactor, you have to remember that this catalyst has a very poor, relatively poor selectivity. So of course, the final yield will be normally dictated by the relatively low selectivity of this first catalyst. And indeed, this is exactly what we observe if we just mix the two catalysts as a mechanical mixture and we put them in the reaction. We also have a selectivity that is about 30% and a yield that is about 20. So same problem, actually, we keep having this problem of over-oxidation on the gold catalyst. So how to solve it? Well, maybe by putting the two active species together on the same solid so that the path between the two active phases, active sites, this one and then the tin one, would be shorter, and you have a better chance for this intermediate to go towards the final product. So for this, we will need the bifunctional catalysts, and we were not the first to try. Some other people tried with classical stepwise impregnation methods, and it was not really successful. So we thought, why not trying it with our technique by putting, of course, our magic trick here, MPTMS, the gold and the tin precursor. So same concept, and indeed we characterize again, we keep a very good dispersion of the gold, we keep a good insertion of the tin, we indeed check that we have a good dispersion by the titration technique, and indeed this catalyst, so when we compare the mechanical mixture and the bifunctional catalyst, of course, the amount of tin and gold in both cases is exactly the same, but it's just that here they are on the same particles. You see the selectivity that increases significantly. For this kind of reaction, 50% is already something that is quite remarkable. And it is because we have a fast substrate channeling from one active site to the other active sites here. So again, this is an example, but we have demonstrated other cases for methanol synthesis from CO2 or for the ethanol to butadiene reaction, where we also need bifunctionality and where this kind of strategy was successfully employed. In the next part, I want to talk about hybrid chemoenzymatic catalysis. Why? Because I think that chemocatalysis and enzymatic catalysis are two separate words, but at the interface, we can find some very interesting things. And it's, there are many opportunities there, but there are also challenges. And I can illustrate this with one example. Here we targeted the epoxidation of allylic alcohol, and for this you need hydrogen peroxide as an oxidant and a zeolite. This zeolite is excellent to do that job. And we thought, instead of just bringing hydrogen peroxide, why not using hydrogen peroxide that is produced by an enzyme? This is a model reaction, it's not the most interesting economically speaking. There are other examples that are more interesting, but in terms of proof of concept, it's the one I choose to show you that what if we wanted to exploit both a zeolite and an enzyme on a single bifunctional heterogeneous catalyst? That would be a challenge, actually. Because if you want to graft an enzyme, of course, putting the enzyme inside, putting the enzyme inside of the porosity is impossible. You have micropores, so it does not fit in. And grafting it outside is complicated as well, because you don't have a lot of anchoring points and it's not very stable. You could think of encapsulating, but then there are other challenges that I will skip here. Our idea was to use the concept of a catalytic nest. So we want to keep this zeolite because it is water resistant and it has excellent performance, but we know we cannot put the enzyme in or on. So we would just build a supra particle, so a bigger particle that is hollow and in which we're going to put the enzyme. So we don't need to graft it or something. In this context, you can put, with this concept, you can put a higher enzyme loading. You can even put different types of enzymes. And normally you can make it that you don't have any leaching of the enzyme outside of the material. So of course, how do we do these catalytic nest particles? By spray again. We spray a suspension of nanocrystals and we shape those spherical particles. They look like these spheres, about 1 micron or 2 microns here. You can zoom in, you see the zeolite nanocrystals here, and the binder that we have used, it's a porous silica. If you zoom in a little bit more, you see the pores of about 8 nanometers here, and interparticle particles pores as well. Some additional images just for the beauty of it, let's say, where you see the crystallites, the zeolite crystals, and also 3D tomography to show you that we indeed have hollow particles. We have, of course, characterized all these particles. I will go very quickly here because there's no point in going into the details, but basically we do check that we have the porosity, the microporosity, the mesoporosity between the crystallites, and also the cavity here that is tested by mercury porosimetry. We check also that the zeolite itself is not affected. We still have the same signal in XRD, the same signal in UV visible spectroscopy. So that means that the speciation of titanium is preserved. And of course, because of that, we have an activity that is preserved. You see here the blue line is almost as high as the red line, which is the pristine zeolite. Why is it a little bit lower? Well, because you put a little bit of silica in this material. Silica is not active. So if you normalize by the TS1, you have exactly the same activity. Also, the activity, the catalyst is fully recyclable. So nice. Our nest is okay. Now, what to do with it? We just load it with an enzyme by impregnation. Once the enzyme is in, we wash a little bit, and then we use a strategy that is based on precipitation and cross-linking to make what we call CLIAs, cross-linked enzyme aggregates. These aggregates are too big afterwards to escape the cages. They stay there, and we have our bifunctional catalyst. We check, of course, that the enzyme does not leach. It is truly encapsulated, and its activity is preserved. A little bit lower, but actually we gain in stability here for this activity, enzymatic activity. So if you use just the cage, inorganic cage, and you don't add hydrogen peroxide, nothing will happen. But if you use the hybrid, well, you see the production of hydrogen peroxide by the enzyme, and then the use of this hydrogen peroxide by the zeolite to produce the epoxide that you wanted to target. So that's a proof of concept for a chemoenzymatic approach. And of course, if you do this for one reaction, you can do this for other reactions. We're starting to play Lego now in my lab, changing the type of nanocatalyst, changing the type of enzymes, targeting other reactions, including bio-based reactions, including chiral amine synthesis, chiral alcohol synthesis, and all those kind of things. I would like to finish with a short section on spark ablation, because spark ablation is something that I find quite exciting. What is the concept of spark ablation? Spark ablation has been discovered quite some time ago now, and you can already actually buy an apparatus that allows you to do that. We collaborate with a company that is called VS Particles for that. And the concept, very briefly, is to put two metal electrodes very close to each other and then apply an alternating voltage, which will trigger very locally sparks between the electrodes. And the conditions here are extreme, but very, very locally, you have thousands of kelvins, so very high temperatures. And at those temperatures, a tiny amount of the metal will vaporize. This is called ablation, and you will form atomic clusters, which are swept away with a cold inner gas. We use nitrogen in our case, and then they will just agglomerate or aggregate and form what we call primary particles, or even bigger particles if we need. So this is done in an inert. You start from a metal and you get metal nanoparticles. Usually they are just collected on a flat surface, can be an electrode, a filter, or whatever. These are slides from the company. I will not go into the details of the plots and tables that you can see there, but just maybe commenting them very briefly by saying that they have already demonstrated that it was possible to do this with a large panel of metals and even carbon and oxides, but mostly what is interesting here is the metals. You can also do it with alloys. So if the electrodes are alloys, you have alloyed nanoparticles. In some case, also you use one pure and another pure of two different metals, you also get alloys. What is interesting also, especially for me in catalysis and in the perspective of fundamental understanding of heterogeneous catalysts, is that depending on the conditions of the working conditions, you can choose actually the size, the position of the size distribution that you can see here, targeting something closer to 15 nanometers or smaller, around 3 or 4. In some cases, they have been able to go even lower, 1 and 2. Okay, so that's very nice. And as the pore distribution is relatively narrow, you can think of designing kind of fundamental studies that could be quite interesting. And also they have quite a good production rate that is very stable in time. What I would like to focus on is the control on size, the purity, because you don't have any other thing. If you want to make copper nanoparticles, you just take a copper electrode and you will form pure copper nanoparticles. You don't have any additives, salts, solvent, whatever. So in terms of atom economy, it's also good for the preparation of your catalyst. You don't use anything else. The limitation, though, was that the particles were always collected on a filter or deposited on a flat surface. So when I started discussing with the company there, I said, okay, I'm interested, but I want to be able to put it on a powdery support because I need powdery heterogeneous catalysts. So what we have designed together is the coupling of this nanoparticle generator with what we call the powder disperser. It's based simply on a kind of vortex, which will aerosolize, if you want, your support particles and bring it towards the nanoparticle generator. In a scheme, it looks like that. We have our support, we aerosolize it, those particles are carried away, we use a trick to de-agglomerate them, and then we bring them very close to the spark itself, where they are decorated by the nanoparticles, and then we collect them. Okay, so we have electrode, the powder, in our case, we worked with titanium, and we worked with nickel electrode as the first example. How do the particles get attached to the support? Well, it's simply Brownian motion and van der Waals forces. There's nothing more. It's just that they are very close to each other, and we hope to see them sticking to the support. What I want to insist on here, I have to insist, we prepare a metal supported catalyst by using no solvent. There's no solvent, organic solvent, water, whatever. There's no precursor like a salt or alkoxide or chloride or whatever. It's the pure nickel electrode. No ligand to wash, no surfactant to burn. There's no need for washing, and even you don't need to calcine it or to reduce it because you directly have metal nanoparticles. We will see in a second. So I think it's a quite kind of elegant way to prepare this kind of metal-supported catalyst. If we analyze those catalysts, well, of course, if you analyze by XRD the pristine TiO2 support, you get anatase and rutile faces as expected. If you analyze the support, you see almost the same thing. But if you're very careful, you can see the one set of nickel and also nickel oxide because you have surface passivation if you manipulate them in air. They are quite small, apparently, should be smaller than 5 nanometers. And indeed, if you look at them in electron microscopy, this is what you see, and you recognize the facets or the despacing for the two faces here. Unfortunately, in this case, we also saw nickel particles that we call floating particles, which are not in touch with the support. All those here, they are in touch with the support, those ones not. So that's a problem because we want to disperse them on the support. And in some cases, for part of them, it's not the case. They are floating separately. So we tested these kind of catalysts in CO2 methylation, and readily they are quite active. They fall in the range that we find typically for nickel-based catalysts, as you can see there, as expected. If we analyze the spent catalyst, we see that the spent catalyst still contains a lot of tiny nickel particles attached to the titania support. So that's what we want. But if we are careful enough, and I want to be honest with you with that, we did find in some very rare places huge chunks of nickel, which are of course not active, and these come probably from the floating nanoparticles we have highlighted before. So that has to be improved, of course. They are also detected in XRD here. We have expanded the scope of investigation towards ruthenium, and with ruthenium, it's even better because ruthenium does not even need any pre-reduction in the reaction. It's readily active. At high temperature, it starts to be on par with the reference catalyst, but at lower temperature, it's more active, significantly more active. We see also a slightly lower activation energy that we think is due to a better dispersion of tiny ruthenium particles on the support instead of patches, as we see in wet impregnation. This is in preparation on my slide, but actually it has been published in ChemCat 2 weeks ago or last week. So this brings me to the conclusion of my talk. I hope I could illustrate that the aerosol-assisted sol gel process offers you many opportunities to tailor the texture of your materials, to target high metal oxide dispersion in your silica, but it could be another oxide via what I call the kinetic quenching. If you need nanoparticles, you can start with a material where the metal is trapped into the oxide, and then you trigger the exsolution of the nanoparticles by calcination. And you can easily combine and have multifunctional catalysts that are very interesting for a range of applications. I'm very, very excited about the field of hybrid chemoenzymatic catalysis. I think there are many opportunities there. And here, this idea of just building a cage and putting the enzyme in it offers many opportunities in terms of heterogeneization of your enzyme and ease of coupling both types of catalysts. We do check that there's no leaching and that we can do cascade reactions. So that opens up some doors. And then finally, the spark ablation, which is also to some extent a mild preparation technique that happens in the air, offers you the chance to prepare nanoparticles in a green, direct, and controlled manner, and to directly deposit them onto the support. And I think there are opportunities in terms of catalytic screening, fundamental studies on the size effect, on alloys, etc., etc. With this, I would like to thank a bunch of people in my lab, those working in the lab, and also collaborations here. And I would like to thank you all for joining the seminar and also the organizers. And I'm happy to take questions, of course.